Hi and welcome to this presentation, webinar session on exploitation. So let's get started. My name is Patrick Lismore. Thank you again for taking the time to watch the video. Certainly do leave comments in the comments box below if anything wasn't clear for you. So a little bit of background who I am. Certified ethical hacker. About 13 years working in technology, from web development right through to digital forensics, penetration testing, networking, multiple programming languages, multiple operating systems. Just tried about everything there is to try, right down to reverse engineering. Do you have a day job? Lead the security around the software products and solutions that we develop at the company I work with. So today the agenda is going to follow what you see here. Typically we're going to look at penetration testing within the context of we're going to look at exploitation in the context of penetration testing. So let's get started with some definitions. So, from my experience, penetration testing is typically conducted on products, solutions, or services, corporate networks, to test the defenses, essentially, to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities, or to test that the security controls and measures in place are doing what they're supposed to do. So penetration testing is typically narrowly focused. You get a scope, you agree with the customer or the client, and that scope will define what assets you can test. Typically you may get IP ranges. The scope will be well defined, because what they don't want you doing is deviating off and poking around in different places where they don't want you to, essentially. So it's sensitive work. You know, if you're trying to breach a server and there's sensitive data on there, you know, you need a good integrity for this kind of work. But essentially, penetration testers will, you know, come into a company, start doing some reconnaissance, scan the hosts, basically attempt to penetrate the computer system through exploiting vulnerabilities, and then when they're on a machine, they'll escalate privileges. Essentially, they'll try and pivot and dig deeper into the system or the organization. Let's think what else could be useful. Yeah, so typically, again, the last part here at the end of a penetration test, a report is generated, essentially, of what happened, what was found, and some negation actions. So this is typically the phases involved, the steps involved within a penetration test. We're today looking at the exploit of vulnerabilities, and just another example here. We're going to exploit uncovered vulnerabilities. So we need to do work ahead of that there, essentially, to identify vulnerabilities, identify services, versions of services run on target systems, and then we'll exploit those. Now I wanted to just take a second and explain the difference between these, so the penetration testing phases and ethical hacking. As you see, they're pretty similar. Reconnaissance, scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, covering tracks. You get the reconnaissance, gaining access is around the exploiting the vulnerabilities, escalate privileges, and then you get this reporting element. Certainly, ethical hacking, there'd be some reporting, but again, sometimes your goal with the ethical hacking is to act like an attacker. So that would mean, you know, covering tracks, removing log files, stuff like that. So yeah, you probably do a report as well, but you can see they're very, very similar. Penetration testing, very focused. very narrowly focused sometimes. Emphasis on the reporting at the end, essentially. So, just wanted to mention that before we went ahead. So, we're looking at exploitation within the penetration testing phase. So what are we trying to do really? So we've got to the stage, we've done some reconnaissance, we've scanned hosts, we've enumerated the network, we've gathered intelligence. By this stage, we hopefully have a list of services running on targets. We probably have fingerprinted them. We know what the network looks like. We know how many hosts are on there. We know what kind of operating systems they're running. We know what versions of what services are running, and that's key. Because once we know the version of a particular service that's running, we can then go look, find out if there are vulnerabilities for that particular service. In terms of the operating system, if we know it's a certain operating system with a certain patch level, we can then obviously go look at some exploits, some vulnerabilities for that particular unpatched system. So during this stage, we would typically use some automated tools, some exploit frameworks. Metasploit comes to mind. It's pretty popular. Core Impact, typically if we're doing some commercial exploitation, working for a larger company, or if you have access to the kind of tools, Canvas and stuff, Core Impact's probably a good commercial tool. It's a large library of commercial exploits. So, but automated tools are great. They quickly help you get some information, quickly help you sort of validate vulnerabilities quickly. However, you still need an element of manual checking, manual scan. Just the human element to the penetration test and the human element to the exploit. Sure, tools can do it, but you really want someone skilled and experienced to go in and do it. So that might involve writing some custom exploits. So any good ethical hacker, penetration tester should be able to write custom exploits. They should be able to write code that will exploit a certain vulnerability. And I wanted to just say that some of these exploits you write work. Sometimes the same exploit you try to run again somewhere else fails. Just be aware of it. It's not always successful for lots of different reasons. Just be aware also that some of the exploits that you run may crash the target system. That is important. If you're doing this in a production environment, for a client, you got to be careful. Your exploits may damage, take a system offline, and you want to cause downtime for your client. So let's start really with what is the definition. So my thinking here is an exploit is some piece of code, some technique which can be taken advantage of. Essentially, we're looking for some security vulnerability on a target system that can be taken advantage of, and that's the exploit. It's a piece of code or technique that takes advantage of a vulnerability on a target system. For a penetration tester, the aim is to validate the vulnerability. So we're not doing this for fun. We're not doing this for profit. In a penetration test, we're there with a list of vulnerabilities that we found, and we're validating them vulnerabilities to say this is a genuine factor into a machine, and if so, by exploiting that, we can then validate it and say this is definitely a hole, you need to mitigate this and fix it. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to validate vulnerabilities. So what are we exploiting? And I put up here just again to highlight, just for the context here, what we mean by when we talk about exploit. That code or technique taking advantage of a vulnerability on a system. So during the exploitation phase, the step of a penetration test, we are essentially trying to gain remote access to a target machine, so we can run commands on it, so we can configure, pivot off it, do escalate privileges and such. So we're trying to gain access. So when we exploit the target, we would sometimes want to move files to it, or want to take files off the machine if they're sensitive files. If we want to, if it's the first foothold on a network, we particularly would probably want to sit and sniff the traffic from that machine to that machine. We might even want to reconfigure that particular machine so that we could then pivot and launch further exploitation deeper down in the network. We also might want to install our own software on there, keyloggers. We might want to install specific pieces of software that's going to allow us then to maybe hide our tracks, maybe use it to set up a proxy and so forth. But again, really depends on what the scope of the penetration test is with the client. And again, you'll have your rules of engagement during the start of a penetration test to define what you can and cannot do, especially on production system. Missing that in there. So again, if you're targeting production systems, it's extremely important that you have these rules of engagement, because if anything goes wrong and you're on a system, let's say for example in the financial services sector, and you take down a production system and they're losing millions by the hour, they will hold you to account. So just make sure you have that up front. So again, we talked briefly in the other slide there of why we're exploiting. We're exploiting the vulnerabilities to assess, and validate that they are genuine risks. And it's the human element of, looking at, say, the output of a tool, let's say Nessus. Let's say you have a Nessus scan or an OpenVAS scan, and you get this report of vulnerabilities. And by going in as a human and taking those vulnerabilities and trying to exploit them, we're essentially validating them and assessing the risk in an overall context. It might be where the machine is located, the network it's on, lots of different factors. But really, we're validating the vulnerability so we can assess the risk more accurately. I think it's a nice, clean way of putting it. Yeah. So again, we're trying to reduce false positives. Nessus will run a scan, you get a nice report, but some of those vulnerabilities may not really be as serious as what Nessus claims it to be. A company might spend time, money, resources tackling those potential vulnerabilities, when in fact, if you validated some of them, you find out they're probably not as serious as what Nessus makes out to be. So when we go into exploit and validate a vulnerability, we're just going further than an automated scan, essentially. So further, understanding here is, when we validate a vulnerability by exploiting it, we can assess, which vulnerabilities can lead to an attacker pivoting through that vulnerability to launch further attacks deeper in the network deeper in the company. So as a penetration tester, during the exploitation phase, we are trying to create this realistic simulated attack. Thinking like a hacker, what would they do when they breach one of these vulnerabilities? Well, we're going to try and pivot from that. We're going to try and dig deeper into the network, see how far we can get them. As a penetration tester, we are exploring real potential risks here, and of course it's typically also a manual test. I use a combination of both automated and manual testing. Automated tools is good for quickly getting a sense of what vulnerabilities are there, and then we can quickly go through some manual validation. And the last point, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. The current vulnerability tools, that should really be the vulnerability scanning tools. They're good. So Core Impact's good. Nessus, it's good. However, you really want human input, especially from an experienced security expert, with penetration testing, or certainly I think a hacking background, to take it to the next level. But the tools can't. Certainly, Core Impact can install agents and it can pivot, and it's great, but it's recommended that you can have someone with that skill set who can do that without the dependency on a tool such as Core Impact or one of the other versions out there. So the risks, so again, I touched on briefly on the other slide. You have to be aware of what is going to happen when you run these exploits. If you're working for doing a penetration test for a customer, they're going to let you into their company. They're going to let you touch their sensitive systems, and they're going to put a lot of trust in you. So integrity is key. So you got to be aware of what's going to happen when I run this particular command with these particular flags. Because running a certain command with the wrong flag, you could flood their network. You could, take a service offline, crash a system. So very important with being aware, understanding. Just don't blindly run a Hail Mary attack from Armitage against a target system and not know what it's going to do. So it's important. Again, system can crash, stability could be compromised, security could be weakened, sensitive data could be exposed. And if you end up getting your hands on data information within the company that is out of scope, you could be held to account there. They could sue you or worse. So fully understand the exploits before running them. Very, very important. Can't stress that enough. And again, going back to our rules of engagement, documenting at the very start and getting that sign off by the senior management, key, very important. So you gotta, be transparent, keep them updated along the way, especially the people working on the systems. If you're going to run a couple of exploits, it's helpful to discuss with the people running the networks, maybe running the system. Hey, these vulnerabilities are here. I'm going to potentially exploit them and validate them. This is what I'm going to do. The conversation with those people, give them the heads up, is almost always appreciated. So if suddenly a system goes down at a time you're doing that, they can see the correlation and they can resolve any issues quicker. So key, speak to people. Don't be afraid to go speak to the people running the systems. Get their input. So when we're talking about exploitation, computer exploitation, information system exploitation, we can categorize those exploits into typically three different ones. The server-side remote exploits. These are the traditional, shall I say, exploits. So we're targeting the server remotely. So we're at a remote location. We're remotely penetrating that system. Client-side exploit. You need some kind of user engagement here. So perhaps you have to trick the user into clicking your link that sends them to a site with a malicious download, or you send them a file and that file's booby trapped. So that's the client side. You need the user to run the malicious code on their system, which typically will then call back to a server you've set. And local exploit. So local exploit is when you're on a system. For example, you've gained access to a system using some weak credentials, but you haven't got admin privileges or system privileges or root access. So you might run a local exploit, which will escalate privileges, give you the highest access on the system. So it's generally what they mean. Sometimes as a penetration will do them all. And as I've put here, many exploits may be needed to compromise the target system. That's true. You do need a large selection to choose from. So that's really it. I wanted to keep it short. This video just to introduce you to the topic of exploitation and how it falls into the penetration testing phase. So just in summary to recap, so the exploitation of vulnerabilities is in this stage. So it says exploiting uncovered vulnerabilities. So during this stage here, you've identified some vulnerabilities, and at this stage you want to exploit those. Again, I'll leave you with the exploit definition. A code or technique takes advantage of some vulnerability on a target system, and our aim as penetration testers using an exploit is to validate a vulnerability. Just make you aware again, categories: remote, client, and local. And just be conscious, be aware of what's happening when you start to run exploits. So I guess I could leave you with maybe just a one tool for those who don't know. So Metasploit from Rapid7 is pretty popular. It is an exploit framework. I typically use it from the command line. Let me get you a nice picture. You'll find when you load it up, this tends to change every time you load it up. This is your Metasploit framework console. So from here, there's a whole rig of commands you can do to run exploits against targets of your choice. And one of the most popular operating systems for penetration testing and ethical hacking is the Kali Linux distribution. Linux. I highly recommend it to have a look at if you trying to see if there's any pictures there. No. So if you haven't seen Kali Linux before, I certainly do recommend it. It comes with a whole suite of tools. Here's a picture here. This is the desktop of Kali Linux 2. Application, you see they've got them categorized. So you get stuff for information gathering, for web applications, for vulnerability analysis, for cracking passwords, reverse engineering, exploitation tools, sniffing and spoofing, forensics and reporting. So I'll leave you with that. You have a great day.